Hey everybody, it's Mike Schellenberger for Public. Nearly a full week has passed since President Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race and threw his support behind Vice President Kamala Harris. In that time, Harris has made clear that she will run on her record as a tough and effective prosecutor. But anyone who comes to California knows that we are in a crisis. Our violent crime rate today is 31% higher than it is in the rest of the United States. 1 out of 4 San Franciscans say they were a victim of crime last year. Now you might think, well, you can't blame Kamala Harris for all that. That's Gavin Newsom's fault. After all, he's the governor, whereas she's the vice president and was a U.S. senator before that. But Harris was the district attorney of San Francisco from 2004 to 2011 and attorney general, which is California's top law enforcement officer from 2011 to 2017. And it was during those years that crime in California started rising. According to the liberal think tank, the Public Policy Institute of California, violent crime here rose 26% over the last decade. And it's not like Kamala Harris was helpless to do anything about crime while she was a U.S. Senator from 2017 to 2021, or as Vice President since then. Now, it's true that 20 years ago, Harris ran as a tough-on-crime district attorney in San Francisco. In 2020, Tulsi Gabbard famously criticized Harris for incarcerating people for marijuana. But the number of people in prison for drugs has never been very large. Even in 1997, the height of the war on drugs, just 1% of all prisoners in the U.S. were in for a first or second nonviolent drug offense. And California legalized marijuana for medical use in 1996 and for all use in 2016, so it's really a non-issue. But then, between 2010 and 2014, Harris changed. By 2019, she described herself as a progressive prosecutor. In 2020, Harris denied that the police prevent crime.
For too long, the status quo thinking has been you get more safety by putting more cops on the street. Well, that's wrong.
But that's not wrong. That's a mainstream view among criminologists. In fact, an overwhelming amount of evidence, including a major study commissioned by the Obama administration, finds that more police do in fact reduce crime, from shoplifting to murder. I'll link to that evidence below. In the same interview, Harris claims that there is less crime in wealthier neighborhoods because they put money into schools, not police.
If you want to look at upper middle class suburban neighborhoods, they don't have that patrol car. They don't have those police walking those streets. But what they do have, they have well-funded schools.
That's also wrong. The reason police don't walk the streets of those neighborhoods as much is because there is less crime there. And when there is crime, you'd better believe that those upper middle class suburban neighborhoods want the police showing up as soon as possible. It's inconceivable that Harris doesn't know this. She was San Francisco's district attorney. She knows perfectly well that there are more police in poor inner city neighborhoods because there's more crime there. Not only was Harris lying, she was doing so in service of making the argument that we should defund the police. And defunding the police had consequences. Most crime experts today agree that the calls to defund the police resulted in police pulling back, therefore emboldening criminals and causing murder and other crimes to rise. Somewhere around 3,000 black lives were lost to homicide thanks to the defund police movement. During the 2020 primary debate, Harris talked of her support for initiatives around re-entering former offenders and getting them jobs and counseling. A great idea.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. We created initiatives that were about re-entering former offenders and getting them counseling.
But according to NBC News, at least 7,000 prisoners became homeless in Los Angeles alone from 2019 to 2021. Now you might think she's not responsible for that. Turns out she mostly was. After all, it was Harris, who was Attorney General, who wrote the highly biased summaries for the ballot initiatives which caused the increase in crime and homelessness. In 2014, Proposition 47 decriminalized hard drug possession and shoplifting, a deadly combination, and in 2016, Prop 57 released many prisoners, including violent ones, despite the lack of a rehabilitation and re-entry system that Harris claimed to have created. Together, those two propositions, along with incentives for homelessness, in the form of cash and free housing, increased homelessness in California by 50% over the last 10 years, from 113,000 to 181,000. California has 12% of America's population and 1/3 of its homeless. I'm not the only reporter to come to this conclusion. Even NBC News, which is strongly pro-Harris, last year concluded that California's reforms created a prison-to-homelessness pipeline as counties were overwhelmed with an influx of returning inmates. The situation Harris created in California means she cannot claim to be a strong defender of vulnerable people. Of the 25% of San Franciscans who said they were victims of crime last year, 42% of them said they were victimized more than once, and only half bothered to report it to police. Harris is responsible in another way for the crisis, and that's through her role as a top immigration official in the Biden administration. Now, it's true, border czar was never her formal title, but Biden clearly put Harris in charge of dealing with root causes of immigration, and she didn't do that. And now the increase in border crossings from 400,000 to over 2 million, due directly to the Biden-Harris administration's more liberal immigration policies, is overwhelming homelessness services in California. I was on Skid Row in Los Angeles last week, and I discovered migrant women and children living in extremely dangerous conditions. One migrant mother with a 2-year-old child told me that other homeless women had fought with knives just outside of her tent. Experts agree that the increase in the U.S. homeless population last year was a direct result of the influx of migrants from around the world. Harris should have massively expanded homeless shelters to deal with the influx of both former prisoners and migrants to the street, but she didn't. In May, she announced a $5.5 billion in new funding supposedly to address homelessness, but she dedicated just $290 million to homeless shelters and services and just $30 million for addiction rehabilitation and recovery. Well, why is that? Why did Harris go from being a tough-on-crime prosecutor to someone who called for defunding the police and has starved cities of the money they need for providing basic homeless shelters? If you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing now to support Public's independent, award-winning journalism and to hear the rest of this video.